The conveyor belt wasn't supposed to be running. It was 2:47 in the morning. And the overnight lull had settled into that particular kind of airport quiet that never feels peaceful. Even when the terminals go dim, even when the last red eye is airborne, and the last delayed family has stopped arguing with the gate agent, there's still motion in the bones of the place. Vents breathing, distant wheels. A muted announcement bleeding through concrete and steel, softened until it sounded like someone talking in their sleep. In the lost luggage warehouse, though, there was a schedule. There were rules about when the belts ran, what got pulled, what got logged, what got locked away, and what got left alone. Unless a late inbound truck arrived, my lane stayed dead. So when the belt under my station shivered and started to creep forward, my first thought was that I'd done something wrong. Maybe I'd bumped a switch. Maybe I'd misread the time. Maybe I wasn't as awake as I'd been pretending to be. Then a suitcase rounded the corner on the rollers and glided toward me, like it had been released from a hand. It wasn't on a cart. It wasn't in a stack. It wasn't part of a batch with a bright orange, rush strap, or a torn tag flapping like a surrender flag. It came alone, old, scuffed, and the color of dishwater. Gray that had once tried to be fashionable and failed. No airline tag, no claim sticker, no barcode I could see. It traveled down the belt, slowed, and stopped with its handle lined up perfectly with the edge of my station. Like it knew where I stood. I stared at it for a full 10 seconds before I remembered to breathe. If you've never worked in a place like that, you'd think lost luggage is a pile of sad, anonymous rectangles. You'd be wrong. Bags carry personalities. People pack like they live. People pack like they're dying. People pack like they're hiding. My name is Nolan Pierce, and I took this job because I ran out of options I could afford to be proud of. 2 months earlier, I'd been sleeping on my friend's couch, pretending it was temporary. 1 month earlier, I'd been amicably informed that my position at a small shipping company was being eliminated. 2 weeks earlier, my girlfriend, no ex, had texted me a photo of a lease with her name on it, and a caption that read, "I can't keep waiting for you to stabilize." I'd stared at that message until the screen dimmed, then brightened again when my thumb twitched, like my phone itself couldn't stand the silence. When the airport posted an overnight position with differential pay and benefits after 90 days, I applied before my brain could invent reasons not to. They hired fast, too fast. Honestly, the interview was 5 minutes of confirming I could lift 50 pounds, pass a background check, and not steal. They didn't ask about my experience. They didn't ask about my character. They asked if I could follow protocols. Because this is a chain of custody environment, the woman in HR said, like she'd rehearsed it. We don't need creativity. I'd nodded like that wasn't a strange way to describe a room full of abandoned suitcases. My first week was training shifts, watching, shadowing, learning the layout of the warehouse, learning the lingo. The pit smelled like rubber wheels, old perfume, and damp fabric that never fully dries. The overhead lights were fluorescent, and the shade too bright. Like they were trying to bleach the shadows out of corners that didn't want to be clean. Behind my station was a wall of steel shelving, with clear plastic bins, labeled in black marker. In front of my station was the belt, rollers, sensor posts, a scanner mount, and a little kiosk terminal with a keyboard that was missing the end key. Someone had taped it back on with packing tape. It still worked barely. The supervisor on nights was named Maribel Sato. She was in her late 40s, maybe early 50s, hair pulled tight, face that never softened. She didn't bark orders. She didn't have to. She spoke like everything she said had already been agreed upon by people you'd never meet. On my first night, she'd handed me a laminated sheet with the title Lost Property Sorting Protocol, printed in capital letters. I'd expected rules like log every item, wear gloves, do not remove batteries, secure passports, escalate firearms. All of that was there. Then, near the bottom, separated by a thick black line, like it didn't belong with the rest, was a different kind of instruction. If you see the gray case, do not open it. Do not attempt to identify contents. Do not disengage latches. Do not place on any belt or card not designated for supervisor escort. Log sighting only. Call supervisor immediately. No reason why. No reference number. Just that. When I'd pointed to it and asked, half joking, is this like a prank? Like some intern wrote a creepy rule. Maribel's eyes had fixed on me. Not angry, not amused, just measuring. "It's not a joke," she'd said. "Call it what?" I'd asked. "The gray case," she'd repeated, like there were no other words available. That was the first and last time I'd heard her voice sharpen. The friendly one on nights was a guy named Dev, probably my age. Maybe a little older. He wore his badge clipped to his belt like he wanted it visible, and he never stopped talking. On my second training shift, Dev had leaned in while Maribel was on a phone call and whispered, "Don't ask about the weird rule. It's like asking your parents why they sleep in separate bedrooms." I'd laughed because it felt good to laugh, and Dev had smiled like he'd done his job. Security was handled by an airport contractor. The guy assigned to our part of the warehouse was named Lyle Benton. He was tall and hollow, cheeked, always a little too quiet. He didn't loiter. He didn't socialize. He walked slow patrols with his hands behind his back and looked at the walls like he was checking for cracks that weren't visible yet. The first time he'd seen me alone at my station, he'd stopped and said, "You knew?" "Yeah," I'd replied. He'd stared at my badge, then my face, then the belt. "Keep your head down," he'd said, and walked away. Not exactly a welcome, but I'd taken it, that night. My first solo overnight shift had started normal. Maribel assigned lanes, checked logs, reminded everyone that missing items weren't missing, they were unreconciled. And then she disappeared into her office with the door shut. Dev worked 2 stations down, humming under his breath, while he sorted a pile of children's backpacks that had been pulled from a shuttle bus. Lyle made his rounds, and I did what I'd been trained to do. The work itself was almost meditative if you didn't think about what it meant. You unzip, you glance, you categorize, you scan, you print a label, you place it in a bin, you move on. I handled a battered carry. On that smelled like cigar smoke, and had 3 identical phone chargers wrapped neatly with rubber bands. A violin case with a cracked bow and a name written on the inside, in careful block letters. The violin case bothered me more than it should have. Not because it was creepy, because it made me imagine the moment someone realized they'd left it behind. You can replace clothes. You can replace toiletries. You can even replace a laptop if you're insured and lucky, but something like that. It felt like a limb. Dev wandered over with a styrofoam cup of coffee and said, "You holding up?" "I'm fine," I told him, even though my eyes felt like sandpaper. "First solo nights always feel like the building's watching you," he said. "Yeah," I said, glancing up at the black domes in the corners. Dev tilted his head like he was about to add something, then thought better of it. "That's probably because it did," I said. He laughed. And for a few seconds it felt like a normal job. Like I hadn't stepped into a place with an unspoken rule about a suitcase you weren't allowed to open. Then Dev's radio crackled. He listened, nodded at nobody, and started walking back to his station. Maribel wanted him to check a manifest, or an incoming batch, or something bland and official. The belt under my station was still. The clock on the wall clicked forward, 2:47. The belt shivered, and the gray case arrived. I didn't touch it immediately. I stood up slowly, as if sudden motion might startle it. The suitcase was medium, sized, hard-sided, with metal latches instead of zippers. The corners were worn down to a lighter shade, like someone had dragged it across concrete for years. The handle was an older style, thicker, more rigid, built to last. There was no brand label, no personalization, just a gray rectangle with 2 latches that looked too clean. I leaned closer, squinting for anything I could scan. Sometimes tags get ripped off. Sometimes airline stickers peel away. Sometimes you get a mystery bag that takes extra time to reconcile. But the gray case didn't look like it had ever been tagged. It looked like it had been manufactured anonymous. My scanner sat on its cradle, green light pulsing lazily. I lifted it and aimed at the flat surface of the case anyway. The red beam swept across, searching for a barcode. Nothing. I tried the other side, the bottom, the handle, the latches. Nothing. My training brain told me to log it, set it aside, and radio Maribel. The problem was the part of my brain that had been living on couches and watching my life shrink. That part wanted answers, because if a place has a rule like this, it means something happened before you arrived. It means someone paid for the lesson so you wouldn't have to. My hands hovered. The metal latch was right there. A simple mechanism. Flip it up, pull it free. That's all. I could do it faster than it took to think about it. And then I remembered Maribel's eyes. It's not a joke, she'd said. My throat tightened. I forced my hands down to my sides and reached for the terminal keyboard instead. The login screen blinked. I typed my employee number, then my password, then selected incident log, because that was where the training module had shown the gray case rule lived. Under incident type, there was an option I hadn't noticed before: special asset citing. My cursor hovered over it, and my stomach did a slow turn. I clicked it. A new screen appeared with empty fields, description, location. Time, handler name. I hadn't printed anything. I looked down at the printer mounted under the desk. The paper slot was empty. The indicator light was off. Then the printer whirred. A strip of adhesive label slid out, crisp and white, like it had been waiting for permission. I hadn't touched the print command. I stared as it advanced, then stopped, perfectly cut. The label read, Pierce Nolan. Authorized handler. My hands went cold. That wasn't how labels worked. It printed tracking numbers, dates, barcodes. It didn't print my name like I was the luggage. I backed away from the desk so fast. My chair wheels squealed, and in the sudden quiet the sound felt like I'd screamed. Dev looked up, from 2 stations down. His eyebrows lifted, questioning. I forced a smile that probably looked like a grimace. Fine, I mouthed, and he hesitated, then went back to work. I swallowed, picked up my radio, and thumbed the button. Maribel, I said, trying to keep my voice level. This is Nolan at station C3. Silence then, faintly. Her voice came through like she. Dee'd been right beside the mic when she answered. Do not touch it, she said. Step away from the belt. I didn't touch it, I said quickly. Another pause, longer. What did it print? She asked. I looked down at the label on the desk like it might bite. It printed my name, I said. For the first time since I'd met her, Maribel sounded like a person instead of a policy manual. Stay where you are, she said, and the radio clicked off. I stood there, staring at the gray case sitting on the belt like a patient animal. The belt had stopped moving again. No other bags came. No other noises changed. It was just me, the fluorescent hum, and that gray suitcase that the rules said I wasn't allowed to open, and the label with my name on it, lying on my desk like a claim ticket. A minute passed. 2. Then from inside the gray case, I heard something that wasn't shifting contents and wasn't a rattle. It was softer than that, a single deliberate sound, like a fingertip tapping the inside of the shell, testing for thickness. Once then nothing. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And when Maribel finally emerged from her office, walking fast enough to show she was afraid without ever breaking into a run, I realized this job wasn't about lost luggage. It was about what the airport couldn't afford to admit it had found. Maribel didn't come alone. Lyle appeared first, gliding out of the shadowed corridor that led to security and facilities. His posture stiff and his expression carved into the same blank caution he always wore. He didn't look at me right away. He looked at the belt, at the gray case, and then, very deliberately, at the emergency exit door behind my station, like he was checking whether it was still where it belonged. Maribel followed a few steps behind him, her badge swinging against her sternum, her hair even tighter than usual. Dev trailed her, slower, wiping his hands on his pants as if he'd forgotten. He was still wearing gloves. I noticed that Dev wouldn't get within 6 feet of the suitcase. He stopped short, like there was an invisible line on the floor. Maribel did not. She approached the gray case with the careful confidence of someone picking up a venomous snake by the right end. She kept her hands open and visible, palms slightly out, as if she were proving to the suitcase that she wasn't sneaking anything. She glanced at the terminal screen, then at the label printer, then at the white strip with my name on it. Her jaw tightened. "Where is it?" she asked. I pointed. Maribel didn't pick it up. She didn't even touch the edge. She leaned forward just enough to read it, then straightened, and I saw the first real crack in her composure. It wasn't fear exactly. It was recognition, like she'd seen the same phrase in a place she couldn't forget. Lyle stepped closer to me and said, low enough that the others couldn't hear, "Did it print by itself?" I nodded. He exhaled through his nose slowly, like that answered a question he'd been carrying for a long time. Maribel turned her head toward Dev without taking her eyes off the case. "Devon," she said, "go to the office. Lock the door. Dev swallowed. Do I say no? Maribel said. Dev hesitated one more beat, then turned and walked away with quick, tight steps. When he was gone, Maribel looked at me. You did not disengage the latches, she said, and it wasn't a question. No, I said. I didn't touch it. Good, she replied. The way she said it made my stomach sink. Not because she believed me, but because it sounded like if I had touched it, we'd already be past the point of fixing anything. Maribel reached behind her and snapped on a pair of gloves. Not the thin blue nitrile ones we used for sorting. Thicker. Darker, almost like the kind you'd use to handle chemicals. Then she did something that didn't fit the warehouse. Didn't fit any lost luggage environment at all. She pulled a small zippered pouch from her belt, one I hadn't noticed before, and unrolled it onto the desk beside my terminal. Inside were items that belonged on a crime scene cart. Tamper seals, evidence tags, a marker, and a handheld barcode printer that looked newer than anything we used out on the floor. I need you to listen carefully, Maribel said. You are going to do exactly what I say. You will not improvise. You will not argue. I nodded too quickly. She glanced at the gray case again, then at the belt. Step back, she ordered. I moved until my shoulders hit the steel shelving behind me. Maribel leaned in, scanned the outer shell of the case with her own device, and frowned when it did nothing. She tried again, slower, like speed might matter. Nothing. Lyle shifted his weight. It won't take, he said, like he'd seen it happen. Maribel pressed her lips together. Then she did the thing I hadn't expected. She scanned my printed label. The device chirped immediately, a clean, happy sound. Maribel stared at the little screen, then lowered the scanner, like it suddenly weighed too much. What? I asked before I could stop myself. Maribel's gaze snapped to me. For a second, I thought she was going to tell me to shut up. I thought she was going to punish me for asking. A chain, I echoed. Lyle's eyes stayed on the suitcase. Chain of custody, he murmured. That's not. I started, and my voice cracked. Maribel's tone flattened again, hardening into policy, because policy was the only armor she had. It is an item under restricted exception, she said. I don't even know what that means, I said. Maribel looked at my face like she was deciding how much truth I could survive. Neither do we, she said finally. Not fully. She pointed at the gray case without touching it. The rules exist because opening it has consequences, she said. Not consequences like you get fired. She paused. The words didn't make sense in my head. I tried to assemble them into something rational and failed. Maribel turned the terminal screen toward her and navigated to a page I'd never seen in the system. The interface changed, cleaner and colder, with fewer colors and more confirmation prompts. At the top, it read Restricted Asset. Field Handling Interface below it were fields already populated. Asset Designation, Gray Case Status, Active Last Known Location, LPSC-3 Handler, Pierce. Nolan. Pending my mouth went dry. Maribel typed quickly. Her hands did not shake, but the muscles in her jaw flexed, like she was grinding her teeth down to the root. She selected an option labeled Supervisor Escort, and a new prompt flashed. Confirm handler has not engaged latches. Maribel clicked yes. Another prompt, confirm handler has not opened shell, yes. Confirm handler has not attempted identification. Maribel hesitated here. Her eyes flicked to the label printer again. She clicked yes anyway. Then the screen displayed, internal transfer required time window. 8 o'clock, I stared at it. What does 8 minutes mean? I asked. Maribel didn't answer immediately. Lyle did. The conveyor belt creaked beneath the gray case, as if it heard him. Maribel reached into her pouch and pulled out 2 thick red tamper seals. She looked at me. My throat tightened. No, Maribel's eyes narrowed. You can't make me, I said, and it wasn't bravery. You did, Maribel replied. She tapped the laminated protocol sheet that was clipped to the edge of my station. You signed the onboarding forms acknowledging restricted exceptions, she said. You agreed to comply, and more importantly, she stopped. The air in the warehouse felt suddenly heavier, like the vents had stopped pushing. Lyle's head turned slightly, like he was listening. Maribel lowered her voice. My stomach rolled. What happens if I don't? I asked. Maribel didn't look away from me this time. The way she said, another way, made it sound like there were options worse than lifting a suitcase. Lyle finally looked at me fully, his eyes tired. "You want my advice?" he asked. I didn't answer, but he gave it anyway. "Do the boring thing," Lyle said. "Do the rule thing." Maribel stepped close to the belt again. And this time, she did touch the gray case. Not the latches, not the handle. She pressed her gloved fingertips lightly against the side of the shell, like she was testing temperature. Then she flinched. It was subtle, a quick tightening of her shoulders, but I saw it. "It's warm," she said. "Dev had brought me coffee earlier that tasted like metal. The warehouse itself was cold, always." The air conditioning ran constantly to keep the place from smelling worse than it already did. "Suitcases shouldn't be warm." Maribel snapped back into motion. "Nolan," she said, "stand at the end of the belt. When I push it to you, you pick it up by the handle. You do not tilt it. You do not shake it." "Where am I taking it?" I asked. Maribel's eyes flicked toward the far end of the warehouse, toward a door with a keypad and a sign that read "Authorized Personnel Only." Behind that door was a corridor I hadn't been down during training. I'd seen it, of course. Everyone saw it, but no one went there unless Maribel told them to. "That's the unclaimed hold," she said. "Unclaimed hold is for valuables," I said, because my brain was clinging to something normal. "Passports, jewelry, electronics." Maribel's expression didn't change. "Yes," she said. Lyle stepped away from us and started walking ahead, toward the vault door. He pulled out a ring of keys and a small flashlight, though the corridor was lit. When he reached the keypad, he didn't type. He scanned his badge. Then he looked back at me and Maribel like he was about to lead a funeral procession. Maribel put one hand on the gray case and nudged it along the rollers toward me. It moved smoothly, too smoothly. The suitcase slid down the belt without wobbling, without the usual jitter of wheels catching. It traveled like it was gliding on something unseen. It stopped in front of me again, exactly aligned. Maribel nodded once. "Now," she said. My hands hovered over the handle. I expected the handle to be cold plastic. I expected it to feel like every other suitcase handle. When I wrapped my fingers around it, I had to fight not to pull my hand back. It was warm. Not, left in the sun, warm. More like skin, and when I lifted it, the weight was wrong. It wasn't heavy exactly. It was balanced, like it was helping me, like it wanted to be carried. I picked it up and turned toward the vault corridor. The warehouse suddenly felt too quiet. Even the fluorescent hum seemed to dim. I walked. Each step careful, my arms stiff, the suitcase hanging from my hand like a promise I hadn't meant to make. Lyle held the vault door open. Maribel walked close behind me, not touching the case, but close enough that I could feel her presence like a guardrail. As I crossed the threshold into the corridor, the air changed. It smelled older, dust and cold metal and something faintly sweet, like dried flowers pressed between pages. The corridor walls were painted a different shade of gray than the warehouse. Less industrial, more institutional. The ceiling was lower. The lights were warmer, but they didn't make the space feel welcoming. They made it feel like a waiting room. Halfway down, we passed a small window set into the wall. Behind it was a room filled with monitors. A camera station. On the screens I saw the warehouse from different angles. Belts, stations, shelving. One screen showed my station C3 empty now. My chair pushed back. Another screen showed us walking down the corridor. I stopped, my feet locked, because on the monitor, the gray case wasn't in my hand. On the monitor, my hand was empty, curled as if gripping a handle that wasn't there. But the case itself floated 2 inches behind me, moving along at the same pace, perfectly centered, like it was following. My skin prickled. Lyle noticed my stop and followed my gaze. He didn't react with surprise. He reacted with resignation. "Keep moving," he said softly. Maribel's voice cut in sharp. "It's not on," I started. "Do not," Maribel repeated. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. I forced my eyes away from the screens and walked again. The gray case's warmth seeped up through the handle into my palm, like a slow pulse. At the end of the corridor, Lyle unlocked a second door. This one was heavier, with a thick rubber seal around the frame, like it was meant to keep air from passing through. Inside was the vault. It was smaller than I expected, but packed tight with shelves and lockable cages. Clear plastic bins stacked neatly, a few metal cabinets with combination locks, a desk in the center with a logbook, the size of a phone book, and a small thermal printer. The air inside was colder than the corridor, but not the warehouse cold. This cold felt preserved, like the room was trying to slow time down. Lyle stepped in first, then Maribel, then me. Maribel pointed to a clear spot on the floor, beside the desk. "Set it there," she said. I lowered the gray case slowly. The moment its wheels touched the floor, the overhead lights flickered once. Just a blink. Maribel didn't seem to notice, or she did and pretended not to. Lyle opened the logbook and flipped pages, until he found a section separated by a red divider tab. He ran his finger down columns of dates, initials, and coded notes. Then he stopped. He tapped a line with his finger. Maribel leaned in, read it, and her face tightened. "What?" I asked. Unable to help myself, Maribel didn't answer. She reached for the thermal printer on the desk and hit a button. A new label printed. She tore it off and held it up for me to see. This one didn't have my name. It had a different code, one I didn't recognize, and a single word. Pending Maribel stuck it to the top of the gray case, smoothing it down with her gloved palm. For a second, I thought that was it, that we'd done the rule thing and the case would sit here, inert, like any other sealed object. Then the latches clicked, not popped open, just clicked. Once, both of them, in perfect unison. Maribel's hand froze on the shell, Lyle's eyes snapped to the latches, and my stomach dropped as the suitcase vibrated. Barely noticeable, like something inside had shifted to match the new label. Maribel pulled her hand away like she'd touched a hot stove. "No," she said quietly, and it was the first time I'd heard her sound like she was pleading. The thermal printer whirred again, even though no one touched it. Another label slid out. This one read, "Transfer incomplete then." Beneath that, in smaller text. Handler required Lyle shut the logbook with a decisive slam that echoed in the tight room. Maribel stared at the gray case, like she wanted to will it into being normal. I looked from her to Lyle and back again. "What does it want?" I asked. Maribel's eyes finally met mine, and when she spoke, her voice was so controlled it sounded like it was held together by thread. "It wants you to claim it," she said, "and if I don't..." I whispered. The lights flickered again. This time they didn't fully steady afterward. They held a faint stutter, like the room itself was struggling to stay constant. Maribel took a breath. "What does that mean?" I asked, and I hated how small my voice sounded in the cold room. Lyle answered almost gently. "It means it will decide what belongs where," he said. On the floor beside the desk, the gray case sat perfectly still, but I could feel it, even without touching it. That warmth, that presence, like something waiting behind a door that wasn't locked so much as politely closed. Maribel picked up my printed label, the one with my name, and held it between two fingers like it was contaminated. Her eyes were hard again, but the fear behind them was real. "This place runs on labels," she said. "Tags, manifests, categories. It's all language. It's all agreement." She held the label up. Lyle checked his watch. "The time window," he said. Maribel looked at the gray case, then at me. The latches gave a soft, patient click again. Not a threat, a reminder. And somewhere deep in the warehouse, beyond the sealed vault door, a conveyor belt started moving on its own. Maribel didn't tell me to pick it back up. She didn't have to. The moment the conveyor belt started up in the warehouse, distant, muffled through two doors in a corridor, I felt it in my teeth, the way you feel bass from a car stereo through a wall. The building had a rhythm, and suddenly it was off. Lyle moved first. He crossed to the vault door and pressed his ear against it like a doctor listening for a heartbeat. His face tightened. "Belt's running," he said, though we all already knew. Maribel's gaze snapped to the gray case. The label on top, pending, looked too bright against the scuffed gray shell, like a fresh bandage on an old wound. Maribel's gloved hand hovered over it, then pulled back again, like she didn't trust herself. "What do you mean it will start sorting?" I asked. Maribel didn't answer in words. She walked around the desk to a metal cabinet with a keypad lock and punched in a code, so fast her fingers blurred. The cabinet clicked open. Inside were folders, thick ones, tabbed and color-coded, and a small beat-up spiral notebook. stuffed in the back like it wasn't meant to be official. She grabbed the spiral notebook and tossed it onto the desk in front of me. It landed open to a page that had been written on in heavy black pen. Not typed, not printed, handwritten, in the same careful block letters I'd seen inside the violin case earlier, which made my stomach twist because that meant I was noticing patterns. My mind had no right to connect. At the top of the page it read, "If you are reading this, do not open it." Below that, a list. 1. Do not disengage latches. 2. Do not look inside. 3. Do not scan the shell. Scan only labels. 4. Do not speak destination codes out loud. 5. If the system prints your name, do not correct it. I stared at the last rule. Do not correct it, I said. Lyle turned from the door. Don't fight the paperwork, he said, and it came out like he was quoting something he'd been told once in a very different tone. Maribel's eyes stayed on the gray case. That notebook isn't mine, she said. It's not corporate. Accumulated from who? I asked. Maribel hesitated. Lyle answered again. From people who lasted long enough to write it down, he said. I swallowed. The cold in the vault felt sharper now, as if it had noticed my attention. Okay, I said. So what's the correct way? What are you asking me to do? Maribel took a breath through her nose. We complete the internal transfer, she said. That sounds like nonsense, I said. And I hated how close I sounded to panic. It behaves like a process, Maribel corrected. It behaves like something that wants the airport to do what airports do, route assign. Lyle checked his watch again. 2 minutes, he said. Maribel snapped into motion. She flipped the notebook closed and slid it out of my reach, like she didn't trust me not to memorize the rules wrong. Then she pulled an evidence tag from her pouch and wrote on it with a marker, her handwriting small and precise. She held the tag out to me. Take this, she said. The tag read, unclaimed hold. Locker 12B authorized handler required. Do not open under that. A barcode and a tracking number. And then what? I asked, taking it with fingers that felt clumsy. You attach it to the handle, Maribel said. Then you pick up the case, and you walk it to locker 12B. Lyle will open the locker. You will place it inside. You will close the locker. Lyle will lock it. That's it, I asked. That's it, Maribel said. Lyle didn't look convinced. Why? I asked. Maribel's voice went quiet. Because the system listens, she said. I don't care what you think it is, she said. The overhead light stuttered again, one long flicker, like a blink that lasted too long. I looked at the gray case. The latches sat perfectly flat. No visible gaps. No movement. But the warmth pulsed up through the air near it. A faint sensation like standing too close to a heater. Maribel nodded at me. Now, she said. My hand went to the handle. The evidence tag brushed my knuckles as I threaded the plastic loop through it and cinched it tight. The tag sat against the handle, like a leash. When I lifted, the case rose smoothly, almost eager. My arm tensed anyway, expecting weight, expecting resistance, expecting something to shift inside. It didn't. It was balanced like an object designed to be carried by exactly one person. Me. Lyle opened the vault door, and we moved into the corridor as a unit. Lyle ahead with keys and flashlight, me in the middle holding the gray case. Maribel close behind me like she could physically keep something from reaching my back. The camera station window was on our left again. I kept my eyes forward, but I could still feel the monitors, could still sense the glow of them like eyes. We passed the window. I didn't look. Still, I heard the soft click of a keyboard from inside the camera room, followed by the faint whir of a printer. Like someone was logging us, tagging us, filing us away. Lyle stopped at a third door I hadn't noticed before. Painted the same institutional gray as the corridor. No sign, just a keyhole. He unlocked it, pushed it open, and revealed a narrow space beyond. Rows of metal lockers lined the walls, each one with a number stenciled on it. The air inside was colder than the vault, and it smelled like old pennies. Locker 12B was halfway down on the right. Lyle walked to it, pulled a key from his ring, and inserted it. His hand paused. His eyes flicked to Maribel. Maribel's face tightened. What? She asked. Lyle swallowed. The key's warm, he said. My grip on the suitcase handle tightened so hard my knuckles hurt. Maribel stepped closer to the locker door and looked at the lock. "It's been used," she said. Like that meant something. Lyle turned the key anyway. The locker clicked open. The door swung outward with a slow creak. Inside was empty, except for a single white label stuck to the back wall. It read, "Pierce Nolan. Contents pending." I stopped breathing. Maribel stared at it like it was an insult. Lyle backed away one step, then another, as if the locker itself had become dangerous. Maribel turned to me. Her voice was too calm, too measured. The kind of calm you hear from someone trying not to set off an animal. "Put the case inside," she said. I couldn't move. "That locker is labeled with my name," I said, and my voice sounded distant to my own ears. "Why is it labeled with my name?" Maribel's eyes didn't blink. "Because the system is anticipating compliance," she said. "It thinks I'm going in there," I said. Lyle's gaze slid away, like he didn't want to confirm it. Maribel's jaw clenched. "It doesn't think," she said, and the correction felt like a desperate attempt to keep language from becoming real. "It assigns. It routes." I looked at the locker again. It was a normal metal locker. A storage unit for unclaimed valuables. It should not have been personalized. It should not have been waiting for me. The conveyor belt noise from the warehouse surged louder for a moment, like a wave. A rhythmic clatter that sounded almost like applause. Maribel stepped closer, so close I could smell her shampoo. Clean and sharp, like peppermint. "Nolan," she said quietly, "I need you to understand." "What?" I whispered. "It only escalates when you resist," she said. I stared at her. "So you're telling me to cooperate with something that's trying to file me?" Maribel's eyes flicked to the label inside the locker, then back to me. "I'm telling you that your fear is a handle it can grab," she said. My stomach churned. "Put it in," Lyle said, voice rough. I didn't like the way he said please, like he wasn't pleading for my safety. Like he was pleading for the building not to notice him. I stepped forward, my feet moving before my mind agreed. I leaned the gray case into the locker. As soon as the wheels touched the metal floor inside, the locker's interior light, something I hadn't noticed before, flickered on. The light wasn't bright. It was the dim, yellowish glow of something old. It made the inside of the locker look deeper than it should have been, like it extended back farther than the wall. I shoved the case the rest of the way in, keeping my fingers away from the latches. The moment I withdrew my hand, the locker door tried to swing shut on its own. Maribel caught it with her palm. She held it open, steadying it like she was holding back a tide. "Close it," she said through gritted teeth. Lyle reached forward and grabbed the locker door. It resisted him. Not dramatically, not like a tug of war, just enough to feel wrong, like the hinges were stiffening. Lyle forced it shut. The latch clicked. He shoved the key into the lock and turned. The lock engaged with a solid clunk. For one heartbeat, the air felt lighter, like a storm cloud had shifted. Then, the locker door bulged outward. Not much, just a soft, subtle pressure from inside, like something leaning. I froze. Maribel's hand snapped to the lock, pressing it, as if she could physically keep it from giving. Lyle stepped back, eyes wide for the first time since I'd met him. The locker bulged again, a little more, and I heard it. Not a tap. Not a rattle. A sound like paper being pulled slowly from a printer, stretched into a wet whisper. Maribel's head turned toward me, sharp. "Do not speak," she mouthed. I nodded barely. The locker bulged a third time, then stopped. Silence settled, thick and heavy. Maribel held her hand on the locker for another 10 seconds, as if she didn't trust it not to lunge again. Finally, she stepped back. Lyle exhaled shackily and jerked his head toward the door. We moved quickly, not running, but fast enough that our footsteps became a steady drumbeat in the narrow locker room. We locked the locker room door behind us. Back in the corridor, the camera station window seemed brighter. I kept my eyes down. We reached the vault door, and Lyle unlocked it. The air inside felt less cold now, as if the room had warmed in our absence. Maribel looked at me, her expression unreadable. "Go back to your station," she said. "Do not log anything else. Do not touch the incident report." "What?" I whispered before I remembered not to speak. Maribel's eyes narrowed. "You didn't hear me," she said. Lyle's jaw clenched. "Maribel, it's the only way," she cut in. But it isn't, I said. Maribel's gaze sharpened. It doesn't have to be resolved, she said. We walked back into the warehouse. The conveyor belt had stopped again. The normal hum resumed. Dev was at his station, shoulders hunched, pretending to work while his eyes kept flicking toward my lane. Maribel headed straight for her office without another word. Lyle lingered near me for a moment. He leaned in and said, so quietly I could barely hear it, "Don't go into the locker room again." Then he walked away. I stood at my station with my hands hanging uselessly at my sides, trying to convince my body that I was safe, because the gray case was locked away. The label printer sat silent under the desk. The incident log on my screen still displayed the restricted asset interface. Handler, Pierce, Nolan pending. Time window, 0 o'clock. As if the window hadn't expired. As if time didn't matter, I stared at the terminal, until my eyes burned. Then I forced myself to do what Maribel told me. I went back to sorting. A duffel bag came down the belt, a cracked suitcase, a backpack with a cartoon character on it. Normal, normal, normal. I tried to let the monotony dull the sharp edge of my fear. It almost worked, until a wheeled carry arrived with a bright airline tag still attached. I grabbed it, scanned the tag, and watched the screen populate with passenger information. The name that appeared wasn't the passenger's. It was mine. Pierce, Nolan, destination, unclaimed hold, and beneath that, in smaller text, like a note from someone who didn't want to be overheard, transfer in progress somewhere behind me, deep in the corridor I wasn't supposed to enter. A locker door gave a soft, muffled thud, like something inside had shifted its weight, like it was settling in. I didn't tell anyone about the screen. Not Dev, not Maribel, not Lyle. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like the kind of stupid decision people make in stories. Right before they get dragged into a vent, or eaten by a shadow. But in that moment I believed Maribel. It wasn't about solving it. It was about not feeding it. And I had this horrible, creeping understanding that in the airport's eyes, whether the eyes belonged to cameras, computers, or whatever else was listening, speaking was a form of agreement. If I said, "My name is on the tag," I would be acknowledging that my name belonged there. I would be participating. So I kept my head down and did the boring thing. I sorted. I scanned. I printed normal labels. I dropped the wallet into documents, and the MacBook into high value, and a set of dentures into medical, and I tried to pretend that the feeling in my palm, like a lingering warmth from the gray case handle, was just nerves. Dev wandered over again, coffee in hand, his eyes too bright for this hour. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't crack a joke. I didn't respond. Dev watched me for a long moment, then set his cup down on the edge of my desk and leaned closer. "Okay," he whispered. My heart hammered. Dev's voice lowered further. "Don't go near the vault cameras," he said. "Don't look at the monitors. If you see your name printed, don't rip it up. Don't throw it away." I looked at him then just briefly. His face was pale under the fluorescent lights. "Why?" I mouthed. Dev's lips pressed together. He glanced over his shoulder toward Maribel's office, then toward the corridor. "Because it likes corrections," he whispered. Then he straightened, forced a grin that didn't reach his eyes, and said in a normal voice, "Anyway, you're doing great. First solo night and you already look dead inside." He grabbed his coffee and walked back to his station. I stood there with my fingers clenched on the scanner grip, trying to absorb what he'd said without turning it into a bigger thing than it already was. Because apparently, even thinking too hard about it might count as attention. The shift crawled. Lost luggage work runs in waves, but nights are mostly small ripples. A suitcase here. A backpack there. A rush from a delayed arrival. Then nothing. By 5:30, my eyes were burning, and my shoulder ached from lifting bags. I kept checking the time because I kept thinking I'd hear the gray case again. Some click, some tap, some whisper of labels sliding out of printers. But the warehouse stayed normal, too normal. At 6:12, the fluorescent lights above my station flickered once, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. No one else reacted. Dev didn't look up. Maribel, S office door didn't open. Even Lyle, passing at the far end of the warehouse, Didn't he change pace? I forced myself to breathe slowly until the adrenaline faded. By 7 o'clock, day shift started filtering in. New voices, new footsteps, new energy. The pit brightened in a way it never did at night. Not because the lights changed, but because people did. Maribel emerged from her office and did her normal handoff with the day supervisor. A guy named Ron who wore his badge on a lanyard and smelled like cologne and breakfast sandwiches. If Ron noticed anything off, he didn't show it. Maribel walked past my station without looking at me. That should have been reassuring. It should have meant the incident was handled, filed, contained. Instead, it made me feel like I'd been placed on a shelf and forgotten. I clocked out at 7:45 and walked out of the warehouse with my backpack slung over one shoulder. The corridor air was warmer. The terminal beyond was alive. Families with rolling luggage, business travelers staring into phones, airport employees in different uniforms, moving with purpose. Normal life. I stood in the employee lot for a moment, letting the early morning air hit my face. My car was dusty, my windshield smeared with old wiper marks. The world looked too bright and too normal to contain what had happened overnight. I drove home. I ate a bowl of cereal standing over the sink, because I didn't trust myself to sit down and fall asleep immediately. Then I crawled into bed. I didn't dream. Or if I did, I don't remember it, which was a blessing. When I woke up that afternoon, my phone was full of notifications, not messages, not calls. System alerts. My banking app asking me to verify my identity. A login alert from my email. New device detected. A notification from my health insurance portal. Your coverage has been updated. And the one that made my stomach drop so hard. I thought I might be sick. Airport Employee Services. Your badge has been deactivated. Please report to HR. I sat up so fast my head swam. Badge deactivated. I'd worked one solo shift. I hadn't stolen anything. I hadn't fought anyone. I hadn't even been late. I opened the employee portal on my phone, typed my login, and watched it fail. Incorrect password. I tried again. Incorrect password. I reset it, answered security questions, and watched the screen hang before giving me an error I'd never seen before. User not found. My skin went cold. I got dressed without thinking, hands moving on autopilot. I drove back to the airport, my mind stuck between denial and dread. Maybe it was a clerical error. Maybe the HR system glitched. Maybe dev typed something wrong. But the closer I got to the airport, the more I felt that same weight in the air, the same sense of invisible attention. As if the building recognized my approach, I parked, walked to the employee entrance, and scanned my badge. Red light. Denied. I tried again. Red light. A security guard at the entrance desk, different from Lyle, younger, with a bored expression, looked up at me. Badge isn't working, I said. He took it from me, scanned it on his handheld, frowned, and then his face smoothed into polite neutrality. This badge is invalid, he said. I just used it last night, I replied. He looked at the badge again, then at me, like he was trying to match two things that didn't belong together. My mouth went dry. What are you talking about? I asked. I work in lost property services. Night shift. The guard blinked. Then he said something that made the world tilt. There is no lost property services listed under this terminal's departments, he said. I stared at him. Behind him, on the wall, was a directory sign with airport departments. Security, maintenance, airlines, retail custodial. No LPs. No pit. My ears rang. That's impossible, I said. The guard's hand drifted subtly toward the radio clipped to his shoulder, not threatening, just ready. Do you have another form of ID? He asked. I fumbled my driver's license from my wallet and handed it over. He looked at it, then at me. He frowned again. This license is expired, he said. My stomach twisted. It's not, I said too quickly. It doesn't expire for... I stopped, because I was about to argue with the label. I was about to correct the system. The guard turned the card over, checked the date again, and handed it back. It expired last year, he said. I looked down at my license. The date was wrong. Not off by a day. Not off by a month. A full year. I had a sudden stupid thought. One that didn't feel like mine. Unclaimed pending. Transfer in progress. I shoved the license back into my wallet. Like if I didn't look at it, it might go back to normal. I need to talk to HR, I said, forcing the words out. The guard nodded toward a hallway. You can go to the public HR desk, he said. Fine, I said, and walked away before my legs could buckle. The HR desk was in a bright public-facing office, near the terminal's service corridor. I waited in line behind a flight attendant and a maintenance worker, my heart pounding the entire time. When it was my turn, the HR representative, a woman with neat hair and a headset, smiled politely. Name? She asked. Nolan Pierce, I said. She typed. Her smile faded slightly. Can you spell that? She asked. I spelled it. She typed again slower. Then she frowned and looked up at me. I'm not finding you, she said. I work nights, I insisted. Lost property services. I started last week. She blinked like she didn't know what to do with that. There is no record of your employment here, she said, still polite, but now with an edge of caution. Are you sure you're at the correct airport? I stared at her. I wanted to slam my hands on the counter. I wanted to yell, but all I could think about was Dev's whisper. It likes corrections. So instead, I forced my voice to stay level. Can you check again? I asked. She did, just to appease me. I watched her screen from the angle I could see. Search results, none. She turned her monitor slightly away, as if I might lunge. I'm sorry, she said. I stood there for a moment, too stunned to move. Then I did the only thing I could think of. I left. I walked out of the HR office and into the terminal, blending into the crowd like a ghost. I should have gone home. I should have called someone, but I didn't. Because as I walked past the baggage carousel in the arrivals area, I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the carousel, among normal suitcases with bright straps and scuffed wheels, was a hard-sided gray case with metal latches. It rode the belt in a slow circle, alone in its cluster, like it was waiting for someone to claim it. And stuck to the top was a fresh white baggage tag. Pierce, Nolan. Final delivery, I didn't touch it. I didn't step closer. I just stood there in the terminal's bright noise, feeling the airport breathe around me, and I understood something with sick clarity. The gray case wasn't locked away. It had been routed. And the destination was me. I backed away from the carousel, without turning my back on it. That sounds dramatic, but my body moved the way it moves around something dangerous in the wild slow. Careful. No sudden signals that could be interpreted as challenge or invitation. I let the crowd swallow me. I slipped between a family arguing over a stroller and a man dragging a golf bag, and I kept walking until the carousel was out of sight. Only then did I breathe. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. I didn't want to look. Looking felt like participating, like letting the system name me again. But I did anyway, because denial doesn't pay rent. It was an email notification from an address I'd never seen before. No subject line, just a single attachment, a PDF. My thumb hovered. Every instinct screamed not to open it, but if I didn't open it, what did I have? A deactivated badge, an expired license that wasn't expired, a job that supposedly never existed, a gray suitcase looping on a carousel like a patient predator. I tapped. The PDF loaded. At the top, in block letters, unclaimed property notice below it. The kind of bland language you'd expect from a bureaucratic form. Dates, reference numbers. Legal disclaimers. Then my eyes caught on one sentence halfway down the page. If you believe you are the rightful owner of the item described below, you must present yourself for verification and claim within 24 hours. Failure to claim may result in disposal or reassignment. Item described below. Gray case. Contents undeclared current status. Active transfer assigned claimant. Pierce. Nolan, there was a location listed at the bottom. Not a terminal. Not a counter. A door number. Service Corridor B. Door 19. My mouth went dry. Service Corridor B was employee. You only went down there if you worked here. And according to every system ID touched today, I didn't. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text. No number. Just a string of characters like a corrupted ID. The message contained one line. Door 19 is waiting. I stared at it until my vision blurred. Behind the terminal's glass walls, jets taxied. People laughed. A child dragged a stuffed animal by one ear. The airport was an organism that didn't care about my private panic. I should have left. I should have walked out. Gotten in my car, driven until the airport was a smear in my rearview mirror. But the gray case had followed me out of the pit and into daylight. If it could ride a carousel, it could ride a truck. A van. A plane. It was already inside the system. And it had my name. The only thing I could do was decide whether I was going to be claimed passively, like a lost wallet in a bin, or whether I was going to walk toward the thing that wanted to file me away, and try to understand what kind of filing cabinet I'd stepped into. So I found Service Corridor B, not by a map, not by asking. I just walked. Airports are designed to funnel you. The public spaces are bright, open, full of signs. The employee spaces are like veins under the skin. Unmarked doors, blank hallways, security checkpoints that look identical until you're lost. I walked along the edge of the terminal until the carpet changed texture, until the smell shifted from perfume and food to cleaning solution and warm plastic. A door marked authorized personnel, set half, hidden beside a vending machine alcove. I approached it like it might recognize me. There was a badge reader. I didn't raise my badge. I didn't want to test it. I didn't want to give the system another chance to tell me what I was. Instead, I did something I hadn't planned. I waited. And as if the airport were eager to cooperate, someone exited through the door. A maintenance worker pushing a cart stacked with paper towels. The door swung open. I slipped through behind him before it could close. He didn't look back. He didn't question it. Employee spaces are full of people moving with purpose. If you look like you belong, you belong. The door shut behind me with a soft click. The hallway beyond was narrow beige and humming with fluorescent lights. Pipes ran along the ceiling like exposed nerves. The air was warmer down here, heavy with the smell of dust and electrical insulation. I walked, counting doors until I reached a sign that read, Service Corridor B, the corridor split. One side led toward baggage operations, the other toward a row of numbered doors. Door 19 was at the far end. It didn't. Do you have a label? Just the number painted in black. No badge reader. No handle, only a metal plate with a single circular indentation in the center, like a place to press your thumb. I stopped a few feet away. My heart hammered so hard I could taste metal. This wasn't a normal door. Normal doors had obvious purposes, storage, electrical. Staff restroom. You could guess what was behind them by the warnings on the sign. Door 19 was blank, as if the airport didn't want to admit it existed. I stared at the indentation. Then, without me touching anything, the overhead lights flickered. Just once. And somewhere behind the door, something moved. Not a footstep. Not a shift. A sound like luggage wheels rolling softly across metal. I swallowed. My phone buzzed again, and I didn't even need to look to know what it would say. The indentation in the door plate seemed to darken, like it was waiting for pressure, like it wanted my fingerprint. I took a step forward, then another. I raised my hand slowly, like I was approaching a skittish animal, and hovered my thumb over the indentation. The metal felt cold even before I touched it, and the moment my thumb pressed down, I felt a strange sensation, like the skin on my thumb was being scanned not for a print, but for something deeper, not identity. Ownership, the door clicked. Then it opened, not swinging outward, but sliding sideways into the wall, with a smooth, silent motion. Behind it was a small room, not a corridor, a room. It was lit dimly, the kind of light used in storage closets, and the air inside was colder than the hallway outside. The walls were bare concrete. The floor was a flat gray epoxy, clean enough to reflect light faintly. In the center of the room sat a single metal table. On the table was the gray case. It looked exactly the same as before, except for one detail. The white baggage tag was gone. In its place was my printed employee label, the one that had come out of the printer at Station C3. Pierce, Nolan. Authorized handler. The latches were still closed. But they were no longer flush. They were raised slightly as if loosened from inside. Maribel's words echoed in my head. Opening it completes a process. The door slid shut behind me. I spun. It didn't have a handle on the inside either. No keypad. No badge reader. Just blank metal. I rushed to it and pressed my palms against it, pushing. Nothing. I tried the seam where it had slid into the wall. no gap, no give. I wasn't in an employee corridor anymore. I was in a contained space, a hold. My throat tightened. And in that tight, cold room, the most terrifying part wasn't the door sealing, it was the quiet. The airport hum was gone. No announcements, no distant carts, no voices. Just me and the gray case, like a meeting that had been scheduled and confirmed. I backed away from the door and stared at the suitcase on the table. I didn't want to touch it. I didn't want to acknowledge it, but I was already here. The system had routed me, and it had closed the door behind me. I took a slow step toward the table. The gray case didn't move, but the warmth rolled off it in waves now, as if it were excited. I stopped at the edge of the table, hands hovering. The employee label with my name stared up at me like a claim ticket. I thought about the notebook in the vault. Do not disengage latches. Do not look inside. Do not scan the shell. Scan only labels. Do not speak destination codes out loud. If the system prints your name, do not correct it. I stared at the latches. They gleamed faintly. Just metal. Just hardware. I could do it in one motion, flip lift. Open. And then I saw something that made my stomach drop. On the far side of the table, tucked under the gray case's edge, was a second label. Half visible, as if it had been deliberately placed where I'd have to move the suitcase to read it. A destination label. The kind that told the system where to send something next. I leaned forward carefully, keeping my hands away from the latches, and read it upside down. Destination, unclaimed hold. Locker 12B status, returned, as if it had been there, as if it had bounced back. As if locking it away hadn't worked at all, only delayed it. A cold realization settled into me. This might not even be the first time I'd resisted. How many times could a system try to root someone before it succeeded? The suitcase made a soft sound, not from inside, from the latches. A tiny metallic tick, like a fingernail on a ring, inviting. I backed away from the table, my hands shaking. No, I whispered before I could stop myself. The moment the word left my mouth, the room changed. The air thickened. The dim light seemed to tilt, as if the room had shifted a fraction of an inch out of alignment with reality. The gray case's latches rose a little more, and the table beneath it vibrated, just slightly, like a motor humming to life. I clapped a hand over my mouth. Too late. I'd spoken. I'd resisted. I'd given it a handle. The gray case didn't pop open. It didn't explode. It didn't do anything dramatic. Instead, the employee label on top began to curl at the edges, as if heat from inside was loosening the adhesive. The label lifted slowly, peeling upward like a tongue, and underneath it, stamped directly into the suitcase shell in neat black letters, was a new line of text. Not printed, not taped, embedded. Pierce, Nolan. Contents. I stumbled back until my shoulder hit the wall. My pulse roared in my ears. If I was the contents, then what was in the suitcase? Or was the suitcase? Me. The door behind me gave a soft click, like a lock settling. The lights flickered again, and from somewhere just beyond the wall, faint as memory, I heard a conveyor belt start moving. The system was still running, and in the silence of that cold room, with the gray case waiting on the table like an open invitation, it hadn't even needed to open. I understood the true shape of the horror. The airport didn't lose luggage, it lost people, quietly, efficiently, with paperwork. And I was standing in the place where the paperwork became final. My first instinct was to do something loud, to slam the door, to kick the table, to scream until someone came running, because airports are full of people trained to respond to noise. But the room wasn't part of the public airport. It was behind the signs and badge readers, behind the polite fiction that everything in a terminal has a reason and a route. The silence in here wasn't absence, it was insulation. I forced myself to breathe through my nose. Slow. Quiet. The way you breathe around a sleeping animal you don't trust. The gray case sat on the table, latches slightly raised, like it was waiting for me to choose. I needed a plan, but plans require facts, and I didn't have any, just Maribel's clipped warnings, and Dev's whisper, and a notebook full of rules written by hands I'd never meet. Still, one rule stood out more now than before. Do not speak destination codes out loud. Why that one? Why would words matter if the system was just software and conveyors? Unless the system wasn't just software. Unless language was the lever. Airports run on codes. 3. Letter airport identifiers. Gate numbers. Baggage claim carousels. Internal routing markers that tell a suitcase where to go without anyone needing to understand it. If the gray case behaved like a process, then it would respond to the same inputs. Scan, print, route, speak a code, and you might be giving it an address. I swallowed, keeping my mouth shut, and looked around the room more carefully. There were no windows, no vents, no obvious camera domes, but the lighting fixture in the ceiling had a tiny dark circle in the corner. And I knew better than to assume it wasn't watching. I stepped sideways along the wall, keeping distance from the table, and searched for anything. Anything that wasn't the suitcase. At first glance, the room looked empty, except for the table. But near the floor on the far wall was a small metal panel, the kind you'd see covering a cable junction. 2 screws held it in place. A maintenance access point. My heart kicked. Maintenance means tools. It means wires. It means the building's nervous system. If I could open that panel, maybe there was a way out. Maybe there was a switch. Maybe this whole room was just a clever trap built by people who wanted it secret. But the notebook had said, "Don't get clever." And Lyle's advice had been even simpler. The second you try to get clever, you become part of it. I stared at the panel anyway, then my eyes flicked back to the gray case, because I couldn't stop myself. The suitcase hadn't moved, but the latches, they were higher now. Not much, but noticeably. Like the case was slowly relaxing, slowly unlocking itself by degrees. The label embedded in the shell, Pierce, Nolan. Contents, looked darker in the dim light than it had a moment ago. I turned away, my skin crawling. If the case wanted me to open it, then maybe the smartest thing I could do was refuse. Just wait. Let time pass. Let someone notice I was gone. Let the normal airport machinery pull me back into the world. I checked my phone. No service. Not even the faint emergency calls only. Message you sometimes get in dead zones. Just a blank symbol, like my phone had forgotten what networks were. A thought hit me, sharp and awful. The airport systems had already started erasing me, badge invalid. Employee record missing. What would happen if I vanished into a room that didn't officially exist? Would anyone even look? Or would the system tidy up the loose thread and keep running? I slid down the wall into a crouch, forcing my breathing to stay steady. I needed to not panic. Panic was attention. Panic was correction. Panic was an argument with the label. I closed my eyes, counted slowly, tried to anchor myself in something real. The feel of cold concrete against my shoulder. The ache in my wrist from lifting bags, the dryness in my mouth. When I opened my eyes, the gray case was still there, but something else had changed. On the table, beside the suitcase, a small stack of papers had appeared. I hadn't heard anything slide or rustle. They were just there, white sheets, neatly aligned, like someone had placed them carefully. My stomach tightened. I stared at them from across the room. The top page looked like a standard airport form boxes. Lines. Fine print. At the top, in bold, property. Claim release below that. Claimant name Pierce. Nolan item. Gray case contents. Nolan's signature required I stared at the word contents, until it stopped looking like a real word. The papers were doing what the suitcase couldn't do by itself. They were offering a legal fiction. Sign here and you agree. Sign here, and you become what the form says you are. The horror wasn't teeth or claws. It was paperwork that could rewrite reality if you participated. My gaze flicked around the room again. No pen. Then, slowly, as if on cue, a pen rolled out from beneath the gray case and came to a stop on the table's edge. It was a cheap airport pen, the kind with a hotel logo or an airline name. This one was blank, no branding. It rolled with purpose. It stopped perfectly parallel to the papers. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The pen did not roll again. The gray case's latches gave a faint metallic tick, like it was impatient. I looked away from the table and toward the maintenance panel again. 2 screws. If I had a coin or a key, I might be able to loosen them. I checked my pockets with slow, careful movements, as if sudden motion might be interpreted. Wallet, keys, loose receipts, my lighter, which I'd kept out of habit even after quitting smoking. A coin, 1 quarter. I held the quarter between my fingers and stared at it like it was a weapon. If I opened the maintenance panel, what then? I didn't have a flashlight. I didn't know what was behind it, but doing nothing was also a decision. The papers, the pen, the form already filled out with my name. It was building a path of least resistance, so I stood, quietly, and moved toward the maintenance panel. I kept my shoulders rounded, my movements small. I didn't look at the table. I knelt in front of the panel and pressed the quarter against the first screw. The screw turned with surprising ease. That was wrong. Screws in maintenance panels are usually tight, gritty. They resist. This one loosened like it wanted to be opened. I swallowed hard and unscrewed the second. The panel came away in my hand. Behind it was not wiring, not conduit, not a junction box. It was a shallow cavity, and inside it was a laminated badge. My badge. The same photo, same number, except the name printed under the photo wasn't Nolan Pierce. It was blank, no name at all. I stared at it, my breath caught. And then, beneath the badge, was another laminated sheet, folded once. I pulled it out carefully and opened it. It wasn't an airport protocol. It wasn't T-corporate branding. It was handwritten in thick black ink, the same block letters as the notebook in the vault. A note. Nolan, if you're rereading this, you already did the one thing I couldn't. You made it to door 19 and stayed yourself long enough to think. Listen carefully. The gray case doesn't want your body. It wants your Tevin designation. It wants your place in the system. That's why it prints names. That's why it routes. That's why it loves forms. Don't sign. Don't open. Don't correct it. The only way I found to break its chain is to give it a destination it can't complete. Not destruction. Not the vault. It routes back. You have to send it somewhere the airport can't deliver anything. Somewhere the system refuses to acknowledge. There's one code that does it. It isn't on any public list. I found it by accident and I don't know why it works. You must print the code on a destination label and attach it to the gray case without disengaging the latches. Do not say the code out loud. If you say it, the system will treat you as a destination. If you can do it, it will route the gray case away from you, but you'll pay. Once it starts processing your identity, it doesn't undo. It just moves on to the next step. I'm sorry. My hands shook so hard the laminated sheet rattled against the concrete. Maribel. She'd written this, which meant been here. Which meant she knew door 19 wasn't just a rumor or a contingency. It was real, and it was a trap she. Dee escaped by learning how to speak to the system without feeding it. I looked back at the cavity in the wall. Behind the note, tucked deeper, was a small label printer. Not the bulky thermal printer from the warehouse. A compact handheld unit, like something field techs use. It had a tiny screen and a slot for label tape. And beside it was one roll of blank label tape, sealed in plastic. My mouth went dry. This wasn't random. This was a cache. A survival kit hidden inside the walls. I grabbed the label printer and the tape and held them against my chest like they could protect me. Then I glanced toward the table again. The gray case sat patiently, as if it knew I'd found the note. The papers and pen waited. The embedded text, Pierce, Nolan, contents, seemed darker now. I didn't have much time. I could feel that, not because the clock was ticking, but because the room's preparations were accelerating. If I hesitated too long, it might start producing new forms, new labels, new ways to force agreement. So I loaded the tape into the handheld printer with trembling fingers. The screen lit up, pale green. Ready? There was a menu, print label, settings, history, history. My thumb hovered over it. If Maribel had used this printer, maybe the code was stored, but that felt like cheating. Like peeking at something the system might notice. Still, the note had said she found it by accident. Accident or not, she'd written the instructions but not the code. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe writing it would make it real in a way she couldn't risk. Or maybe she wanted whoever found this to have to choose, to take a step that couldn't be taken halfway. I tapped history. The screen blinked. One entry appeared, not letters, not numbers, just 3 characters. A code. It didn't look like any airport identifier I'd ever seen, not 3 letters, not a gate. Something else. My heart hammered. I stared at the tiny screen, trying to memorize it without speaking it, without turning it into a sound in my head, because maybe even thinking it too clearly was dangerous. The gray case's latches ticked again. The papers on the table fluttered slightly, as if in a breeze that didn't exist. I forced myself to move. I selected the history entry and hit print. The handheld unit whirred softly and pushed out a fresh destination label. I grabbed it and didn't read it again. I didn't want to look too hard. I just held it like a fragile thing and stepped toward the table. The gray case seemed to radiate warmth now, like a living body. I kept my eyes on the handle, on the shell, not the latches. I reached forward and pressed the label onto the top surface, beside my name label, smoothing it down carefully. The moment it adhered, the room went still. Even the fluorescent hum seemed to pause. The gray case stopped ticking. The paper stopped fluttering. For one heartbeat, it felt like I'd done it. Then the embedded text on the shell, Pierce Nolan, contents, begin to fade, not disappear instantly. Fade, like ink soaking back into paper. And in its place, a new line of text emerged beneath the destination label. Printed directly into the shell, routing confirmed relief, hit me so hard my knees weakened. I stepped back from the table, clutching the handheld printer. The door behind me gave a soft click. I turned. A seam appeared where there hadn't been one, and the door slid open a few inches, letting in a thin blade of hallway light. Not freedom yet, but an opening, like the system was releasing me because the process had moved on. I didn't run. I didn't lunge. I walked out slowly, keeping my hands visible, and the door slid shut behind me with a soft final sound. In the hallway, the airport hum returned faintly, distant and muffled. I leaned against the wall, shaking. For a moment I thought I'd won. Then I looked down at my hands, on my right palm, where the gray case handle had rested all night. A faint black barcode had appeared on my skin. Beneath it, in tiny printed text, unclaimed, status. Pending, the system had let the suitcase go, but it hadn't stopped processing me.